Hello there, and welcome to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I'm excited to be here with you. Honestly, this is like the fourth or fifth time that I've done this intro, and so even though it's not quite smooth still, I'm not going to do it again. I'm actually saving some of these as a blooper reel so that we can, I can put together a reel at some point so you can see how many times I fumble and all the silliness that comes out of my mouth. But anyway, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the YouTube channel. Very excited for you to be here today. And what I want to talk to you today about is your thoughts and my thoughts and everyone's thoughts. Thoughts are, we're always having thoughts, right? As I talk to all of my students and clients, we're always experiencing, even when we're not experiencing quote unquote anything, right? When we're just doing nothing, just sitting around doing nothing, as it were, we're experiencing moment by moment our entire lives in three essential spheres, if you will, three realms, if you will. Okay, the first is the realm of the body. We are experiencing everything with our body. Even when you're just sitting there on the couch watching television, your body is sitting there on the couch watching television, right? And the body has a response to everything that's going on. As you're sitting there on the couch watching television, it might start getting sleepy and more tired and more relaxed to the point where you start to doze off, right? That's a physical response to sitting on the couch and watching basketball, right? Or whatever it is that you're watching. The second sphere of our experiences is the sphere or the realm of our emotions. 100% of the time you are having an emotional response to what it is that's going on. Now, again, sitting there watching something that you care a lot about, you're going to feel strong emotions. Sitting there watching something that doesn't really matter to you, then you're going to feel less emotions, right? But you're always going to have an emotional response to what is happening to you, even when that emotional response would be described as neutral. Okay, that's still an emotional response. I hope that makes sense. So the third sphere, and the one I really want to talk to you today about, is the sphere of the thoughts. Now, which is, again, in every single moment of our lives, thoughts are arising in our mind. Right? There's a statistic that I used to use in a presentation I used to give quite frequently that most of you probably know me from, the presentation that was called How to Tame Stress and Eliminate Reactivity in Less Than 8 Weeks. That rolls right off my tongue still all these years later. But the idea, though, is that the thoughts are always, the statistic that I was going to mention that I used to use in that presentation that used to blow people away. 65,000 thoughts go through your and my brain every single day. 65,000. So that's more than one a second. I don't know that to be true, but it's a lot, okay? It means that the thoughts are constantly coming through our mind. That's the point that I'm trying to make to you. Now, the thoughts can be they can take many different forms, right? That some of us have a sort of voice in our mind that's sort of a chatter that's happening. But the thoughts can be as simple as just a memory popping into our mind. And we don't know where it came from. We don't know why it showed up, but here it is, right? Or it could be, a form of memory would be called intrusive thoughts, right? Which are, trauma related when, all of a sudden you have a memory of trauma that is something that is deeply disturbing to you, right? And that shows up just out of the blue, right? We also have the way that we are perceiving and sort of, the untrained and the unskilled among us are judging, whereas the skilled and the trained among us are doing something more what we might call discerning, right? But either way, we're constantly placing value on the things that are happening in our lives. Again, as we train ourselves through the practices that Art Burns coaching teaches, we learn to not be judging of what is happening, even as we are evaluating things, right? We're not putting it into categories of good and bad, But we're still determining things, right? We're still saying this is the best way to drive to the hockey rink, right? This is the most the best value of Raisin Bran that's in front of me here, right? We're always making these sort of evaluative, associative thinking process, right? That's always happening, right? And then and there's probably more ways in which the thoughts can show up. I mean, I'm not by any means suggesting that this is an exhaustive list or anything. This is kind of just coming to me as I'm going through. You know, I have my notes here, but not a script, right? And the way that the thoughts can often sort of coalesce for us, and I think for some of us this is far stronger than it is for others. And to be sure, there are certain people. I've read that there's some phony science out there that says like 40% of us don't have thought, don't have like an inner voice, an inner narrative. But science tells us something different. Science says that there's actually about 2 to 3% of the population that has a specific condition that prevents that sort of action from happening. So most of us, right, most of us experience our thoughts in what I like to refer to as the storytelling mind. Okay, or the storytelling mind is the mechanism that creates the stories. So most of us are experiencing the thoughts as the stories themselves, right? The stories created by the storytelling mind. Okay, now this is part of what in Buddhism they would call delusion. Yeah, delusion is one of what is known in Buddhism as the 3 poisons, right? So the delusion of the mind is really just not seeing things for what things actually are, right? There's a beautiful quote that I'm gonna say it's maybe Carl Jung, but it could be like Rumi too. I don't know who this quote comes from, but there's a quote in the memory banks of my mind that says that we don't see the world the way the world is. We see the world the way we are. Right, which is to say that perception that we have, that the way that we're telling the story about what we're experiencing has much more to do with, or less to do with what is actually happening, and much more to do with what how we feel in this given moment, and that is how we're perceiving what is actually happening. I know that's tricky, and this is why I always talk about those 3 separate realms of our experience, right? And I shouldn't use the word separate, right? Because that's the point, is that they are not separate. They are actually causative, and they are intertwined with each other. They create each other. Which is to say that if I am feeling tension in my body for whatever reason, okay, it could be anything from being over-caffeinated to being underslept to being underhydrated to being tired, any of that. It could be any reason at all. Or it could be a stress response, right? Or it could be an emotional, response to the intrusive thoughts that might be coming in my mind, right? Any of it. The state of my body in that tension and in that sort of tightness that we feel, and maybe some heat and whatever it is however it is that it shows up for you, that is going to create the thoughts. Not to say that it's not like it creates thoughts like in a sense of like abracadabra, here you are, but the thoughts are always arising, and the tension is going to give the thoughts a certain color, a certain pessimism, a certain, uncertainty, a certain, or actually, sometimes it's a certainty, right? A particular flavor, if you will, right? And again, in what I have experienced in my own experience and in the experience of working with people in this area, it becomes the story. Right, it becomes that sort of narrative that's telling us, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what we must do, what we must never do. Right, those decisions that we make, those perceptions that we have, are arising from this sort of story that we're telling ourselves about everything we're experiencing. And for many of us, this story is just constantly going. It's 100% all the time, you know? And so the thing is that what that story is really doing for us, and I think this is the thing that's really important to understand about this, right? Not only is it giving us, and this is very, very important to understand, not only is it giving us a perhaps an inaccurate description of what is happening, right? Which is very, very important. Again, like a lot of times we might be sitting there and we think that something is much worse than it actually is, to put it in a very simple and basic way, right? Like we believe that we know something that we don't know, and that is the delusion that the Buddhists talk about, right? The idea that I know what this thing is, and now I'm ready to judge it. Okay. And those, as I said, there were 3 poisons. I know I'm bouncing around here, pardon me, but there were 3 poisons we talked about, right? So the first is delusion. And the delusion of believing that something is, you know, negative or positive when it's really neutral kind of thing, is then what leads into that judging. Right? That we when we believe something to be good, we tend to cling to that thing. We get attached to the idea that anything but this is bad, right? And then when we judge something as bad, we then tend to resist that thing, right? We tend to say, no, this can't be happening to me because it's bad. And then we, in either the attachment, the clinging, or the resistance and the aversion, we're going to experience stress. We're going to experience that tension in our bodies, as well as the influence of all the systems of our bodies, right? Our digestive system is changed from this. Our reproductive system is changed by this. Our immune system, our respiratory system, our lymphatic system, all of it is changed by this perception that we have, and the action of the aversion or the clinging to the perception that we have. But that's the point, and that's why these 3 poisons always start with the delusion, because the delusion, the not being able to see things really accurately without that coloring that we give it, that's what leads mostly to the aversion and the clinging that causes the stress, which then causes more of the delusion of, you know, negativity and catastrophizing and pessimism and self-criticism and all the rest. And then it becomes a cycle. And then it becomes a feedback loop that just goes on and on and on. Sometimes it goes for a few hours and we might call it a mood. Sometimes it goes on for years and we call it a personality trait. But really, it's just this mechanism of the mind. And it's this mechanism of the mind that needs to create a story, a narrative, a sense-making tool. That's what it is. You're trying to make sense of your experience. And so not only is it about seeing things clearly and recognizing that the story is coloring what it is that we're experiencing, right? But the most important thing, I think, the most important attribute or the most important functionality of this storytelling mind is that the story is attempting to tell us what's going to happen next, right? And this is a function of your physiological brain as well, right? You are a predictive tool. Your brain is a predictive tool, right? We are constantly, it's 2 things. It's an associative and a predictive tool, right? Because what your brain is constantly doing billions of times a day, it's reading what it sees, it's associating it with everything else it's experienced, and now it's predicting what's going to happen next. And specifically, it's predicting, is what's going to happen next a safe thing or a dangerous thing? Okay? Now, again, this is just a function of the way your nervous system and your physical brain work. But this mechanism is manifested in the process of thinking in the form of stories, which is to say that when, and I have a personal story that just happened this morning that's going to knock your socks off. When something happens to us, It is our drive, our biological imperative to try to figure out what's going to happen next, right? But most of the times we don't know what's going to happen next. And that's kind of the beauty of things. But yet we have this mechanism that forces us to come up with something. You see that? It's taking something where there was nothing and it's forcing something into that nothing, into that emptiness, which is also a concept of Buddhism where they talk about emptiness, which is to be clear from all of this that we're talking about. And this is a skill. But let me give you a perfect example because this literally just happened like an hour ago. It was amazing. So, doing my morning routine and I got my chores and I'm, cleaning out the cat litter and, feeding my kids breakfast. And I'm going through like, okay, well, I'm going to do a podcast this morning and I'm going to do it on the Storytelling Mind. And I had this idea the other day. I have some notes that I wrote down and I'm really excited. And this is a normal process. This is how it always happens, right? This is how the magic happens behind the curtains, folks. So I finally get done with all the chores and everything, get caught up. I'm ready to go. Okay, I plug everything in. I turn on the lights. I light the candle behind me. I read through my notes and I'm like, okay, yeah, we're good, but I'm still like, I think I still had like a half a cup of tea left or something. So, oh yeah, there's that message I needed to return from my friend on Facebook. So let me log on there and I get halfway through, typing out the message and all of a sudden I started getting these like weird notification things coming up on my screen, like one after the other, asking me to enter a password for something. I was like, no. And it just kept coming up and I'm like, oh man, here it is. I got some kind of virus, something, malware in my computer. They're stealing my stuff as we speak. Here we are, and I'm trying to force quit and I'm trying to shut off the computer and nothing is working. Nothing's happening. So finally I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go and I'm going to go have a glass of water. I'm going to shut down just close the laptop and just hope that it, resets itself or something. Right. And which normally anytime this sort of thing has happened, it's usually worked. If I can't quit out of everything, I just put the darn thing to sleep, come back 20 minutes later, and usually just pops right back up. And I know that's not a sound IT way to approach it. I know this is not realistic of me, but it works. And so I don't let myself get too stressed out about it, right? So this time I come back 20 minutes later or whatever. And by the way, it took like half hour to get to this point where I just put it to sleep. So tension is already arising and everything's already kind of, feeling like, oh crap, something's happening here. And this is not going to be good for me today, right? I have a lot of meetings. I have a lot of stuff to do today. This is going to be really difficult, right? This is what's going through my mind. I come back 20 minutes later, open up the computer and it's just black. Like I got nothing. It's just completely, it's on. I can see the keyboard lights are on and stuff, but there's no cursor, no nothing. I was like, oh man, this really is the big one here. We're screwed here. So take a deep breath. I close the computer again and I'm like, I think I had a few dishes left in the sink. So I started doing those just to get my body moving and just get my mind, focused on something else other than this, catastrophe. And of course, the catastrophe is creeping in as I'm doing the dishes and I'm redirecting myself. But then at a certain point, I decided, wait a minute, let me listen to what my mind is trying to tell me about this. And oh my gosh, I mean, you would be amazed at the story my mind created. I mean, it was because there's a lot of different things that are going on in my life, as there always are, right? The other day, my bank account, is frozen because of some data breach. And so my card doesn't work. And so I'm waiting for them to send me a new card. And I'm thinking like, okay, if I take it to the repair guy down the street, I can't pay for it. So like, how can I? And I'm just going through all these different scenarios. And my mind is telling me what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next. And because of the tension and because of the fear that I'm experiencing, the tension in my body, the fear of my emotions, my thoughts are all about the negative. Like, yeah, you're screwed. You got to cancel all your appointments today. You're not going to, everything's going to be a terrible situation today. Everything's going to go wrong today. This is what my mind was telling me. And it really was just like I was just talking, like, bah, 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 bah. It's so chaotic, so chaotic, so chaotic. Now, I'd like to tell you that I just went and did some meditation and sort of got myself back to my grounding and stuff, but that's not what happened, actually. I came back downstairs to my office and I was like, okay, so I'm going to take it over to the Mac repair guy and I'll leave it there. I'll beg my ex-wife to pick it up for me and pay for it, and I'll Venmo her the money when, and maybe I can still get my 5 o'clock meeting today, but I'm going to have to cancel my 3 o'clock. That's the thoughts that are going through my mind as I'm walking down the stairs and thinking I'm going to borrow my son's phone to cancel these appointments and everything else, right? Because that's what my mind told me. That's what the story told me. This is what's going to happen next. And there's the problem with this is because the thoughts are just, it's not like we open a box and say, okay, let me pick this thought up and look at it and say, nah, you know what, that one doesn't seem so true. Toss it back in the box. The thoughts just arise within our perception of our reality. So they're always true to us. It's so hard to not see them as true, but this is the work, right? This is as we practice. And I'm going to get to that in a second. That's why we practice, I should say. I'm going to get to that in a second. But as I'm walking down the stairs, clump, 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 I'm thinking, okay, got to call this person, got to cancel that, got to run over to the Mac store. I can't do this, can't do that. Reshuffling the deck of my whole day in front of me. I get to my computer and I say, let me just see one more time. I open it up and there's my usual screen. I just entered my password, hit return. Everything was as it should be. My computer is fine. I have access to everything. I restarted it just to give it a fresh, clean feeling, and it came back on and everything was fine. I have access to everything. Everything is in exactly where it's supposed to be. So that whole story, that whole thing, I had the next 5 hours laid out in front of me. The next 5 grueling and horrible, difficult hours laid out in front of me. Just 30 seconds before this. And you could not have convinced me that this was not going to happen. Right? Now, I say that, but at the same time, I did know that this was what was going on in my mind, and that's what we're going to talk about now in a second here. I'm kind of feigning a little bit of this, sort of getting lost in it, just a little bit. But I will admit that there were moments where it was like, no, this is a big deal. This is really, and that's of course how it happens, right? The bigger the stakes, the more catastrophizing it seems, and the more true it seems, right? So how do we deal with this? What do we do then, Art? I know what you're saying. I've been there before too. What do we do? Most people believe that it's a matter of, kind of creating a certain story, right? That if we can construct a certain story, then we never have to deal with this, negative story, right? Which there is some sense to that, and I'm not saying that that's wrong, right? And that's where, practicing something like optimism, right? Which is, in that moment, it would have helped me in that moment. In that moment, it would have helped me to ask myself a very important question that none of us ever ask ourselves. What could go right here? What could work out just fine and be completely okay? Because that's actually what happened, right? But we never ask ourselves that question. We never say, what could go right? We only ask, what could go wrong? Which again is the mechanism of your body. Your body is not worried about stuff that goes right, or your brain. When I say your body, I mean part of what I'm including in that is your brain and your nervous system, right? And every method that you have to perceive your experience, right? It doesn't care when things go right, because things going right is never a problem. It's never scary. It's never harmful to us. Things going wrong is all it cares about, because that's where things are dangerous. That's where we get hurt. That's where, things are difficult and painful. And so yes, there is an idea there that is very true, that if we can, balance that negative, the bias that we have towards the negative experience with a positive experience, that certainly is a very beneficial thing to do. But I think ultimately the real skill that applies to this whole process, and again, I am kind of overstating what was going on with me, because in that moment, I was able to continuously tell myself, well, something might work out just fine, right? But more importantly than that, I was also able to tell myself, your mind is just creating this. None of what you're thinking right now is based on an absolute unimpeachable truth. It's all just part of the story of your mind. So in that case, what we want to do, or what we are invited to do in this moment, in all these moments of our lives, what we are invited to do is to not just work on the level of the story itself, right? Not just to say like, oh, the story is very negative now, so let me counterbalance it with a positive story, right? That is one thing we can do, but what we are invited to do is take a step further than that. And all of you on the podcast, I'm doing a motion that looks like stepping back from that, because that's really what it is. It's sort of zooming out and not just, sort of focusing on the details of the story itself, but instead focusing on the mechanism that is creating the story. When we can do that, when we can sit in the sort of observer's role, or the observer's point of view, if you will, and see that our mind is creating this whole thing, that's when we can stay separate from it. That's when we can, again, be objective and critical in our thinking about it, not criticizing ourselves, which is what happens when we get entangled in it, but rather being critical towards the story itself. Now, again, I'll admit that there were moments where I slipped and I lost that sort of separation. I became entangled because this was a big deal. I mean, I'd have to cancel like 3 different meetings today. It was good. And that's income. There's a lot of there, and it's also people are counting on me. This is going to be a big deal. Now, if it's my car getting a flat tire, I don't go through the same process as that. I used to. I used to go through this process even if, the coffee that I bought wasn't the right flavor or something, right? It was always this case. It was always part of this. And that's the thing, right? Like one story and another story are not necessarily separate from each other, right? They are intertwined and overlapping and sort of coming in and out of each other when we're lost in all of this, is what I'm saying. And so the idea is to, again, get that separation. And in that separation, that's when we can see things like the story I'm telling is not just my story either, right? This is the story of my father and my mother and their fathers and their mothers. This is the reactivity that my mother always had to everything. She was like Chicken Little. The sky is falling all the time. Every little thing, even a spilling of a little bit of water, was worthy of the same response as a fire. It was the whole, that was constant. So I realized that, wait a minute, no, my mind coming up with this story is that story. It's not, or it's, again, the storyteller is that person, not me, right? And so that's where, we can then become more authentic and show up as us, whatever that means, right? Doesn't mean we have to be a certain thing, but it means that we can be free, or at least understand the ways in which we're influenced by things that are not us. And that, again, helps us. As soon as we can recognize that stuff, that solidifies or strengthens that separation that we have. That it puts us more solidly in that observer's role and preserves that role for us, so that we can continue to then question the story that it's telling. question and challenge the thoughts that are coming through our mind, where we can say, wait a second, what if the exact opposite of everything I believe to be true? Because there I am, doing the dishes thinking that, oh, there's a virus in my computer and this is all, it's going to be, there's no way to fix it. They're going to tell me that it's going to cost hundreds of dollars at the store. And every single detail got worse and worse and more difficult, right? But it turns out that none of that was even remotely true. None of it. I still have no idea what the cause of this whole thing is. I do suspect, because it was coming during the Internet Chrome, the Google Chrome application, so it's probably some attempt at some kind of malware of some sort. And so at some point, I'll install an antivirus software and run that thing and see what happens, right? But it's nothing what I thought it was going to be. And so in that moment when I was doing the dishes, and again, because this is such a high stakes thing, I lost my grasp on this. I lost the ability to do this. But if in that moment that I'm doing the dishes and the thoughts are coming through this story, I can say, wait a second, you don't know that's true. What if the opposite is true? What if it was just some sort of glitch and it's going to be okay? It's just a software glitch in the latest Mac update. And you're going to update it again in a couple days and it's going to go away. Nothing's wrong. What if that's the case? It can easily be A as much as it could be B. Because each of these are coming from a place of non-knowledge. It's guesswork. It's imagination. And so this is the relationship that we develop with our mind, with the way that our mind creates these stories. And the best, most effective way to create this sort of separation between me and the storytelling mind, right, to get that observer's role is through sitting in meditation, right? Because as we're sitting in meditation, that's all we start to notice is the way the mind tries to pull me away and tries to create and construct all of this stuff that's happening. But in meditation, I'm in a conduition mode. I'm sitting there and watching the way that my thoughts do this. And then I'm training myself to come back and keep returning back to what is, which is the sensation of my breath. If you want to learn more about that, I'm happy to teach you. But at this point, we've gone over our time, and I hope you enjoyed this rather haphazard episode today. It felt very haphazard from my end. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it wasn't so haphazard that it wasn't helpful, because one doesn't necessarily cancel the other out. So anyway, I hope you got some benefit out of this. I hope it was understandable to you. But if you have any questions about this, or if you want to discuss any of this further with me, you know how to get me. art@artburnscoaching.com. Just shoot me an email. I'll reply. We'll figure it out, okay? All right, everybody. Thanks again for watching. Thank you for listening. I wish you well, and I'll be back again real soon. Take care.